After Jesus had warned of growing persecution, he said, "And many will turn away from me and betray and hate each other." So as life gets more uncomfortable for Christians towards the end, it seems that many are going to decide that it's just not worth the struggle. They don't want to be out of step with their peers anymore. They don't want the social isolation, the stigma, the pain that comes with being a Christian. And so many will start to abandon the faith. Is it happening? Let's get into it. In the last few years, a landmark moment arrived in the United Kingdom. For the first time in recorded history, those declaring themselves to have no religion at all exceeded the number of Christians. Atheists now make up 53% of the country, while Christianity has slipped to just over 40%. And what's more, of those who were born into a Christian home, 40% said they were no longer Christian, which means that people are indeed consciously turning away from the faith. This is so notable that it led The Spectator to comment, "The decline of Christianity is perhaps the biggest single change in Britain over the past century." The same thing is happening all over the Western world. In the United States, Pew Research discovered that between 2007 and 2014, the number of people identifying with Christianity dropped from 78% to 71%. And the same report says that nearly 1 in 5 Americans identify as one-time Christians who have now abandoned their faith. Over in Iceland, a recent survey discovered that 0% of their population now believe that God created the earth. 20 years ago, 90% of Icelanders claimed to be religious. Today, that number has dropped to 50%. In Norway, for the first time in their recorded history, there are more atheists and agnostics than believers in God. Nearly 70% of Dutch people now have no religious affiliation, and approximately 700 Protestant churches are expected to close within the next few years in the Netherlands due to low attendance. In Australia, 15% of the population said they had no religion in 2001, but that has risen to 22% today. In New Zealand, it was 30% of the population in 2001 who claimed they had no faith, but that's 42% today. All the numbers, in Western countries at least, are going in the same direction. There are many reasons for this, but it is largely due to cultural pressure. Not so long ago, the wider culture saw Christians as Ned Flanders types, slightly dorkish, locked in a bygone era perhaps, but essentially well-meaning and kind-hearted people who did good things, helping the poor, working with addicts, and bringing local communities together. In the last 15 years, however, the word religion began to develop rather more ugly connotations. People today who hear the word religion are no longer inclined to connect it to kindly grandmas or Ned Flanders types. They're more likely to link it to words like bigotry, extremism, and intolerance. Christianity has become a sinister thing to the millennial. The Spectator notes, "The eclipsing of our national religion has deep implications for those who do retain faith, especially those who wish to pass it on to their children. They must face the reality that they will be treated as oddballs." But it's actually worse than oddballs now. It's bigoted oddballs. Christians are now seen as intolerant extremists. We're excluded from social circles and experience loneliness and isolation now because of our faith. We are constantly taught to feel wrong and wicked for having our beliefs. In offices and schools around the West, Christians are hammered daily for not going with the cultural flow and for always having a contrary opinion on current events. We are berated endlessly and told that God is evil and the Bible is wrong. In TV and film, Christians are always now portrayed as narrow-minded antagonists. On social media, people are losing friends because they're posting Christian content. In the previous episode, we saw that Christians are even now losing jobs and being taken to court now too. After a while, some Christians just get tired of always being out of step with what seems to be this overwhelming majority, and they start to figure that maybe all of these people can't possibly be wrong. And so gradually the pressure tells, and many Christians start to leave the faith and conform to culture. You probably know some, I know I do, people who've left the faith because the price of social exclusion was just too much for them to bear. Matt Philbin from the Cultural and Media Institute recognizes the role that media has played in beating Christians down like this. He says, "I think frankly Christian Americans are just getting tired of getting beat up over their resistance to the cultural flow. I think that at a certain point a cultural fatigue sets in and you get tired of being told that you're backward, being told that you're a Puritan troglodyte and a homophobe who hates people. So you shrug and say, yeah, I'm for it." There's a second, more subtle type of falling away that's also happening. You see, many Christians want the social inclusion and they want the comfort and popularity in this life, but they don't want to turn away from God and become an atheist because they want to retain their salvation for the life to come. They want to be in good standing with the world, but they want to remain in good standing with God too. And so they try to straddle the two worlds by claiming that Jesus is everything the world wants him to be, by claiming that there's no conflict. So the world wants Jesus to be okay with homosexuality. And so this type of Christian will say, oh yeah, the Jesus I know is fine with homosexuality. He's all about love, man, that's fine. The world wants all religions to lead to heaven too. So this type of Christian will say, oh yeah, the Jesus I know lets everyone into heaven. It's fine, follow whoever you want. It's cool, man. The world wants Jesus to be okay with their premarital sex. So this Christian will say, that's fine, yeah, don't worry. Jesus got bigger things to worry about than that. And so the world looks at this person and goes, you call yourself a Christian and yet you're not an intolerant bigot like all of these other Christians that we know. Yeah, you're cool, we like you, you can be our friend and hang out with us and tell us other things that our itching ears want to hear. In other words, this type of Christian creates a false Jesus that the world can't possibly be offended by. And then to them you can say, I'm just like you, be my friend, I'm cool, yeah, we're just the same, there's no conflict. And then to God you can say, I'm still a Christian, I still go to church, I still follow you, I still get into heaven, right? This is really widespread now. So for example, the real Jesus of the Bible said, I am the way, the truth and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. Yet today, a third of self-identified evangelicals deny these words by saying that Jesus isn't the only way to God. They still call themselves a Christian, they still claim to follow Jesus, and yet they reject what the real Jesus actually said, because that would make them unpopular with the world. Again, the Bible teaches, don't you realize that those who do wrong will not inherit the kingdom of God? Don't fool yourselves. Those who indulge in sexual sin, or who worship idols, or commit adultery, or are male prostitutes, or practice homosexuality, or are thieves, or greedy people, or drunkards, or abusive, or cheat people, none of these will inherit the kingdom of God. And yet, 43% of young evangelicals say they now support same-sex marriage. Or, put another way, 43% of people who still identify with Christ hold to beliefs that completely contradict his teaching. So some Christians are falling away from Jesus and becoming outright atheists, but others are falling away from Jesus while deluding themselves that they haven't. They still say they believe in Jesus, they probably still go to church, but they don't actually agree with anything that the real Jesus says. To those Christians, Jesus basically tells you to get a backbone. He says, the world would love you as one of its own if you belong to it, but you are no longer part of this world. I chose you to come out of the world, so it hates you. So Jesus is saying, yeah, the world's going to hate you if you're truly mine. I'm a divisive figure. Deal with it. It can be distressing to see so many people turning away from the faith in these times, but there's two reasons not to lose hope. Number one, Jesus said that he would build his church and all the powers of hell will not conquer it. This means that the church will never, ever die. History tells us that when persecution comes to the church, it does cause some to fall away, but it actually causes the remnant to get even stronger. It's a bit like gold in the fire. The impurities are burned up, but at the same time, the real good stuff is actually purified. Richard Wurmbrand was a Romanian Christian who suffered under communist rule in the 20th century. He told this story. When the Russians occupied Romania, 2 armed Russian soldiers entered a church with guns in their hands. They said, "We don't believe in your faith. Those who do not abandon it immediately will be shot at once. Those who will abandon your faith, move to the right." Some moved to the right, who were then ordered to leave the church and go home. They fled for their lives. When the Russians were alone with the remaining Christians, they embraced them and confessed, "We too are Christians, but we wish to have fellowship only with those who consider the truth worth dying for." That's a pretty good picture of what happens when Christians suffer. The false converts will flee under duress, but there will always be a remnant who will hold firm under any circumstance. And because of their faith, powerful things will happen through them. A small dedicated few is always more powerful than a large group that is swelled with an apathetic crowd. Remember that Jesus only needed 12 committed disciples to change the world. Even secular writers have recognized this strange level of resilience in the church. The Spectator says, "We cannot even now discount the possibility of a Christian revival. The Christian faith specializes in defying the odds." And then of course the second reason to be hopeful, even in the middle of all of this falling falling away is because Jesus has already told us that this would happen. Jesus said, "I have told you these things before they happen, so that when they do happen, you will believe." Remember, this is why Jesus gives us these prophecies at all. This is the point of this entire series, in fact. So that when troubling things happen, it won't cause us to fall away and it won't discourage us, but it will in fact have the opposite effect. Through the giving of prophecy, Jesus turns something which could be disheartening into something that actually brings heart. And the Bible tells us many times about this falling away, so it shouldn't be a big surprise. Paul too wrote, "For the return of Christ will not come until there is a great rebellion against God." So when Jesus said, "And many will turn away from me and betray and hate each other," this is coming true. He said it would happen, and it has. And for that reason, we don't worry, but we actually take heart.